Alright, welcome to your week 15 lecture. You guys have made it towards the end. This is your final lecture video. It won't be the last video you'll watch if you do watch the review lecture video, but you've made it to the final lecture, if you will. Week 15, your paper is due this Friday, so if you haven't started on that, it's kind of crunch time. You probably should. If you have, though, good job for you. And if you have questions about citations, about how to write properly or anything like that, please send me those questions. I want to make sure that your paper is really good, your writing's really good, and if you even want to send me a draft real quick, I can probably take a quick look at that as well. So, alright, Texas Economic and Social Policy should be a short lecture today, and I'll get you guys out of here real quick so you guys can go write your papers. So, let's go ahead and begin, though, with Texas economy. This is where is the Texas economy today? I just want to give you a quick, brief overview of the state of the Texas economy. The fact is that the Texas economy is really changing. It's a very dynamic state. It's experienced a lot of change in its own economy over the past century or so, but even more so now today because of the introduction of technology, because of the rate of urbanization, as well as the rate of population growth in general here in Texas. For a long time, Texas' economy was focused on agriculture and oil production, but the fact is it's not that way anymore. In terms of ag production, Texas has slipped to 5th in the United States. It used to be number 2 in terms of ag production. Now it is 5th, which is a huge change for such a large state as Texas to go down to number 5 in agriculture production. In fact, agriculture is not even in the top 10 sectors of the Texas economy. It's not even in the top 10 of the Texas top economic sectors. Rather, Texas is experiencing a shift into the technology, manufacturing, and business sectors. Those are the growing sectors of Texas. And along with the population boom, Texas is also experiencing a growth of the real estate market. Now, nationwide, the real estate market is really slumping because we're just now becoming out of a recession and people are not quite yet ready to buy homes again. The fact that Texas has such a large real estate sector really contributes to the fact that so many people are coming in, as well as the fact that the economy is doing very well. Texas is experiencing that massive population boom, like I said. A lot of out-of-state residents are moving into Texas, and I've often said this, myself included. And then you also have a number of immigrants that are flowing into Texas at a rapid rate. Texas ranks number 1 in job growth as of 2014, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It is number 1 in job growth, it's weathered the recession, and it's really just booming. If you want to put it in perspective, you can look to the fact that Texas has the 14th ranked economy in the world. When you compare it to other countries, Texas' economy alone is 14th within the world, and that's not even and that's actual countries. I mean, it's not just other states. California has the 6th ranked economy in the world. Texas has the 14th, which is pretty high. It's comparable to such countries as Australia, Mexico, or even South Korea. Those are the countries that Texas economy is competing with. It's competing with economies of other nations, and other nations that are doing actually quite well. Australia, Mexico, and South Korea all have strong economies. So that really gives you some perspective on how actually how well Texas really is doing. That's the current state of the Texas economy. Let's go ahead and look at just a brief history. Eras of dominant economic activity by era, you can look here that way back when it used to actually be cotton and subsistence farming. That used to be the main economic activity way back in the early 1800s, or from the early 1800s to the mid 1800s, 1820 to 1865. After 1865, particularly with the abolition of slavery, it was not profitable to produce cotton at a high volume anymore. Instead, we kind of focused or shifted a little bit, at least, to cattle and grain production. Cotton was still there, it was still in the background because it is an agricultural product, but we still kind of shift within agricultural to focus on other types of agriculture, such as cattle ranching and raising and growing grains. You enter the discovery of oil at Spindletop, and that's where Texas booms. Texas booms in the early 1900s with oil production, and for about 20 years, oil production was the main economic activity. Shifting not so far from oil production is the refining or the petrochemical-related manufacturing, and that lasted for about 60 years, which makes sense. So oil pretty much dominated the 1900s. From 1900 all the way until 1980, oil was Texas, or Texas was oil, if you will. Texas was the main hub, it was the largest producer, and it also refined all the oil within America. Now, that was for a long time. That was a large era, huge era, and then finally we kind of needed to shift. You have the late oil crisis of the late 1970s, early 80s, and oil wasn't as profitable. Texas was able to adjust once again, and that's where you enter this new era that we're currently in that goes back into the 1980s. From 1980s until present, after the oil crisis, Texas needed to shift, and we looked to electronics as well as biomedical fields to boost the economy. Really high-tech industries, computing, electronics, medical services, healthcare services, things like that. That helped the Texas economy weather the storm of the oil crisis and really enter a new era. And so that's where we're at currently. And like I said, Texas is actually experiencing this technological boom. You can see here that Texas does have a great economy. Like I said, we're ranked 14th in the world. And comparable to other states, California is the only state with a better economy than Texas. And part of that is because, well, California, forgive me. Part of that is because California is such a large state, but it also has a large population, and then also they have a very good tech industry. And that's the main reason why California still ranks ahead of Texas. But for the fact, and given the population and size of Texas, Texas is doing very, very well. Our gross state product, meaning all of the products or the value of the products that we produce, is around over $1 billion. $1 trillion. I always get confused converting these millions of millions. But Texas does rank second, and that's the thing that you need to know for your test. Texas ranks second in terms of states in overall economic production. So keep that in mind for your test. All right. Also for your test, I want you to understand the difference between primary and secondary economic activity. So Texas is doing very, very well. And part of that is mainly because of the primary economic activity, even though secondary activity is very, very high in Texas as well. Primary economic activity basically means earning your dollars from other areas or bringing money in. We have a consumer economy. And in order to have a good economy, you need to have high primary economic activity or lots of primary economic activity, meaning that consumers want to buy your goods. Consumers want to spend money on those goods and products. And that way that money shifts hands, is invested, and things like that. So primary economic activity means bringing money in, selling your goods, exchange of money, exchange of cash for services or exchange of cash for goods. That's primary economic activity. So every time you go to Kroger and you spend money, or you go to Walmart and you spend money, that's primary economic activity. Now, secondary economic activity is what happens to those dollars as soon as that company or that business has your money. Secondary economic activity means circulating dollars within the defined area or within your business. Investing in your own sector, investing in your own business, investing in products to sell, things like that. That's secondary economic activity. You want to expand and improve your business so that it is furthering the economy and providing better services, and that way the customers keep coming back. You want to invest in your business. You got to invest money to make money, and that's secondary economic activity. So for your test, know the difference between primary economic activity and the secondary economic activity. And the fact is that Texas is doing very, very well in both. Not only are people coming in from out of state or from other countries and spending money, they're buying houses, things like that, businesses are also able to, because of all that primary economic activity, invest in their own businesses and improve their own products and really expand and thrive here in Texas. Texas has high primary and secondary economic activity, and that really has benefited the economy of the state. Texas gross state product in terms of economic sector, you can really see here that it's very interesting. Like I said, Texas used to be a very traditional agricultural state, but what you see here is agriculture doesn't even rank on the top sectors or the top economic sectors here in Texas. Texas' economy has really evolved since the 1980s. Manufacturing has increased here in Texas. You can point to a number of automobile companies that moved to Texas. You can also still point to the fact that we are manufacturing or refining oil and things like that. So manufacturing has taken off here in Texas. Real estate. Real estate is huge for Texas. Like I said, many people are moving in, they're buying homes, and Texas has really kind of avoided the real estate crunch that other states have really experienced. Texas is selling homes, people are moving in, and that's good for the overall economy of Texas. In terms of other businesses that are important in Texas, you have mining, obviously oil production, business services. Those tend to be things such as computers and high-tech industries and things like that. Government spends a lot of money on the Texas economy. Wholesale trade, healthcare and social services, retail, and then construction. All of those signal that Texas economy is doing very well. Construction, when construction is high, that means that the economy is building things, that it's growing, that we need new roads, and that people are moving in and things like that. If healthcare and social services are high, that means that you have a healthy economy, you have healthy workers, a workforce that is able to go to work and be productive and contribute to the economy overall. And then, like I said, real estate really signals that the economy is growing as well. So, just want to kind of give you an idea of the gross state product and then break it down by economic sector, so you can see which economic sectors are thriving in Texas and which ones that are still there but may not be doing as well, such as agriculture. Agriculture is not even in the top 10, but it's still an important part. It's just not one of the main things. And so this graph also kind of shows the shift that the Texas economy has undergone. Agriculture, I did want to mention it real quick though. While agriculture may not be a front runner in the Texas economy, Texas is still 5th in production in the United States, which means it's still very important. Texas grows a number of main crops, mainly grains, cotton, soybean, and then nuts. All those crops are grown within Texas, and they still contribute to the agricultural production in Texas. The fact is that just the trend in Texas agriculture has changed. Livestock and ranching has outstripped crop production. Texas's agriculture sector is much more focused on livestock and ranching. And you can see this here by this graph here, where livestock comprises about 66% of overall agriculture production and crops only about 35%. It's just the fact that the nature of agriculture has changed. There's not as many family farms as there used to be. People used to have family farms and then they were able to pass it down to generations. Well, the fact is that so many people have moved into the city that the family farms are often forgotten. The farms are a lot more fewer, and then when there is farms, they're a lot more larger. Because of those families that have moved out or moved to the city and don't own a family farm anymore, other farmers or more specialized or more corporate farmers have been able to buy larger tracts of land and buy out those old family farms. There's increased use of irrigation, and then also there's increased use of chemicals, which allows us to produce a lot more, even though we may not be doing it as much as we used to. Farmers and ranchers are definitely better educated, and then cooperative efforts in marketing have increased the agricultural market as well. There's dependence on outside sources for feed, seed, credit, and chemicals, and that's just the nature of agriculture nowadays. So we have these larger, more specialized farms. We're able to produce more crops, but it's still not as much, or we're not engaging as much in agriculture as we used to, because most people have moved on from agriculture and left the farming to larger companies, company-type farms, corporate farms, rather than the old family farm where everyone used to engage in agriculture and try to produce goods each year. So, mining. Let's go ahead and talk about that real quick. Mining, oil, what used to be a huge part of the Texas economy. And the fact is that Texas still does rank first in oil and gas production. We're one of the few states that has an abundant source of oil. Now, there is declining production due to depletion and also price competition from foreign oil services. So we're not tapping into as much oil as we used to, because the U.S. imports so much, because the reserves are already met, and generally because of it's not as profitable as it used to be. Oil used to be so rare that you could put a high price tag on it and people would actually pay it. But now the fact that there's so much oil coming from elsewhere, oil is not as important. But mining is still important, and as you saw, it is the second-ranked economic sector here in Texas, and Texas, in terms of the states, ranks first in oil and gas production. But even then, the nature of mining and oil production has changed. There's automation of drilling equipment. We don't need as many people to operate the drilling equipment. There's fewer people hired to engage in the mining sector. And then also the fact that offshore drilling and platforms have changed the nature of it. It's no longer going out into Texas and trying to look for an oil source. It's much more, let's go off the coast and look for an oil source rather than have it right here in Texas. So those are the two economic sectors that used to be really prevalent in Texas, but have changed and adapted. And the economy really has changed and adapted and moved on from agriculture and mining, even though they are still important. So that's why it's still important to mention them, even though we need to focus on what's going to happen to the future of the Texas economy. The fact is, the biggest problem on the Texas economy is the strain of the population. Texas' economy will have to adjust to accommodate the massive population growth. You have urbanization, and I'm going to give you the definition of urbanization because it will be on your test and because I think it's really important to think about these sorts of things. Urbanization is simply the process by which towns and cities are formed and become larger as more and more people begin living and working in central areas. Texas has already seen the shift from traditional agriculture-based economy to a more high-tech modern economy. But as more people move into the city, the growth of these industries may take over the Texas economy, and with so many people living in the city, no longer are you going to have the traditional family farms out in the middle of nowhere or out in the rural areas, if you will. What's going to happen is so many people are going to move to the city, they're going to need jobs, and hopefully the high-tech industry can be able to accommodate that and provide those jobs for them. Now, the good thing for Texas, looking forward though, is that Texas has an advantage in attracting businesses due to no income tax. A lot of businesses, particularly Governor Rick Perry, was really good at doing this. He would go to other states and say, he'd go to these other states and go to these businesses and he would say, hey, why don't you move to Texas? There's no income tax. Why don't you come to Texas, start up your business? I will provide incentive for you to do so. And not only that, you will not have to pay any taxes. So Texas is really good at attracting businesses, and more businesses mean more jobs. But also the fact that there's more people moving in means that there's more people to take care of. So as the population increases, Texas will need to provide those public services to those people along with their jobs. So how will Texas keep its low taxes and high standard of living at the same time is a question that Texas will need to tackle. It'll need to accommodate the massive population growth, and it'll need to be sure that there are jobs for those people. Now, Texas is doing very well so far, but there is this concern maybe several years down the road that Texas will not be able to accommodate such a large population. But so far, no worries, and if more businesses keep moving in, then there should be no worries in the future at all anyway. So, just want to give you a little perspective on the future of the Texas economy. Let's go ahead and look at the changes that are actually undergoing here in Texas. This is the change of the total population by county, and this is from 2000 to 2010. I would expect these numbers to be even higher now. But you can see here that the blue means that more people are moving in to that particular county. And what you see here, if you know anything about the map of Texas, hopefully you guys should, you guys are from Texas, you can see here that many people are moving into urban areas. So you have the Dallas, you have the Austin, and you have the San Antonio, and you have the Houston area as well. El Paso, El Paso, along with a number of border counties, are experiencing a growth in population as well due to the immigration issues. So more people are moving into cities in urban areas, and more people are moving into urban and city areas. And then also you need to note that people are moving out of these rural areas, which is really hurting the population of hurting the population of these counties and hurting the rural population. And Texas is really undergoing this era of urbanization, and it'll definitely change the way the economy functions. If more people live in the cities than they do in the rural areas, Texas is going to have to adjust to a high-tech economy rather than an agriculture-based economy like these regions usually have. So this is a quick map. It shows you how much urbanization has really taken off. This is 2010. I would imagine that these numbers are even higher now, and that there's probably even more blue areas around Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. Houston is growing faster than any other county. Harris County in Houston is growing faster than any other county in the United States, actually. So that's also worth noting real quick as well. This is your projected population growth in Texas from 2000 to 2040. Let's go ahead and just follow this this blue line here, this this blue dotted line means that what would happen if the population grew at the rate in which the population grew from 1990 to 2000. If it did that, projected by 2040 that Texas would have over 52 million. Now that's a lot of people. That's a lot of jobs that are going to be needed. That's a lot of resources and public services that are going to be needed as well. Much more realistic, though, I would say, is probably this purple or this green line, where Texas ends up around with 43 to 45 million people in 2040. Hopefully you guys are still alive then. And if Texas' population reaches that much, that's still a very, very significant number. Now, if there was no migration, let's say there was no migration at all, which is not going to happen, Texas would only end up with around 25 million. But the truth is that it'll probably end up around 43 to 45 million, and Texas economy will need to adjust and try to accommodate those many people living in Texas. So, something to think about for the future. It's very interesting. I know that I'm moving out of state after this year, but I will definitely keep an eye on this. Texas's economy is so fascinating, and the population growth that is happening here is also fascinating, encouraging, and kind of scary at times as well. So, the thing that's really concerning in Texas, I guess, particularly when you think about how Texas is going to have to accommodate those jobs and provide public services and try to take care of its people, is the fact that Texas is already experiencing a high amount of income inequality. Poverty is very, very high here in Texas. So is wealth, though, which is very interesting. Texas has a lot of wealth. So if you're on the fortunate side of things, you're very wealthy. If you're on the poor side of things, you're very poor. Poverty is more pronounced in Texas than in any other nation or in any other state in the nation, and in the nation as a whole. Texas ranks among the most unequal states in distribution of income. It's 50th in the nation in percentage of high school graduates, which means public education here in Texas is very, very poor. 50th in the nation in percent of high school graduates means that it has a very low graduation rate. It's also 50th in the nation in percent of college graduates, so not a lot of people are seeking higher education. Students are not only getting the high school education, but they're also not getting the college education as well. This has increased poverty in Texas, and it's also increased the income inequality here in Texas. Poverty is much more prevalent among certain ethnic groups as well, and you're going to see this in a graph that I have here in just a little bit, that those that are identified with a racial or ethnic minority are much more poor than those of non-Hispanic, white, or Anglo descent. You can see here that Hispanics have a rate of about 26% of Hispanics are considered under the poverty level. 21% of African Americans are considered under the poverty level. You compare those double-digit numbers to the fact that only 8% of Anglos live in poverty. But overall, when you consider all the groups, Texas has a poverty rate of 17.6%. So poverty is very, very high in Texas, even though wealth is here in Texas as well. So, why does Texas have such extreme wealth and poverty? Well, the fact is, there's actually a number of things that contribute to this, but the very first one that I wanted to show you here is that Texas has regressive tax policies. If you remember back to last week when I talked about fiscal policy, remember that regressive means that the more you make, the less you pay. The less you make, the more you pay. So what's happening here in Texas is the fact that poorer people are actually paying a higher percentage of their taxes than those that are wealthy. In Texas, if you're poor, you're going to pay a higher percentage of your overall income than, say, someone who makes a lot of money. They're going to pay actually less in taxes. So I have this little graph here real quick from the Institution on Taxation and Economic Policy, and you can see probably around the percentage that you pay based on your income. And it's broken down into the lowest 20, the second 20, the middle 20, the fourth 20, the next 15, the next 4, and then the top 1%. So if you're in the lowest 20%, that means that you make less than $20,000 per year, which I would assume is most of us since we're all students here. Because so many people make less than $20,000, they pay around a 12.5% rate. Now, if you move up a tier, you're going to pay a little bit less, but you're still going to pay a sizable amount. If you make $20,000 to $35,000, you will pay around 10% of your total income. Now, let's say you're very, very fortunate. Let's flip that just a little bit. Let's say you're able to make a little bit more than $100,000 a year. If you're able to make $100,000 more a year, you're actually better off because you're only paying around 6.1%, 4.7%, and 2.9%. So Texas has this tax policy put in place where the more you make, the less you pay. Even though those wealthy people or those that are able to make that much money have the ability to pay more, they are actually making less. Even though they have the ability to pay more, they are actually paying less overall. And part of that has to do with the fact that there's no income tax. Traditionally in the United States, income tax is graduated to be progressive. With income tax, it's usually the more you make, the more you pay. But Texas doesn't have an income tax. And so, because it doesn't have an income tax, it doesn't have a progressive tax policy. It has this regressive tax policy where the poorer people are taxed at a higher percentage than those that are wealthy. And so that's the idea of a regressive policy, is that the more you make, the less you pay, and the less you make, the more you pay, and that's what's happening here in Texas. That's the reason why poor people in Texas are left with fewer dollars, and those that are wealthy are left with more dollars, and so that encourages or exacerbates the problem of income inequality here in Texas. But regressive tax policies are only part of the story. The other fact is that the government invests very little in social services. Usually, those that make less money, or those that tend to be in the lowest 20% income quartile, rely on social services and welfare programs. And because Texas doesn't invest in those, they don't have that money to give, and they don't have those services such as education to advance themselves in society. Per capita, Texas spends very little money on messing up my words here today. Per capita, Texas spends very little money on education, public services, and healthcare. You have a large population, which makes sense, and when you have a large population, it's very difficult to spend a lot of money per capita. That makes sense. But also there's the fact that Texas is a traditionally conservative state, and conservatives are generally against spending a lot of money on those social welfare services. So education tends to be low in Texas, which discourages people from advancing themselves, or makes it harder for them to advance themselves without that education. And then the fact that they just generally don't have public services and healthcare available to them as well, so they can't be active in the workforce either. Now, another problem with the extreme wealth and poverty is the fact that also these numbers are increased by immigration. The increasing flow of immigrants from other nations has increased the poverty rate, since many of those immigrants are actually employed in low-income service sector type jobs. And with that immigration and more immigrants flowing in, the fact that they're taking those low-income jobs increases the income inequality overall even more. So when you look to why does Texas have such extreme wealth and extreme poverty, and why is income inequality so bad here in Texas, it's particularly because of the regressive tax policies, because of the conservative policy goals, because of the fact that they don't spend a lot on public services, and then immigration also generally tends to contribute to the numbers of people in low-income jobs to begin with. So I would say about 4 or 5 factors that contribute to the overall income inequality here in Texas. You want to look to the median income household income, and the fact is that Texas actually does do pretty well. In terms of median household income, Texas is way above average. The average Texan has more money than the average Texan elsewhere. The average Texan has more money than the average American that may reside in another state. So the average Texan is better well off, and so that's also a good sign for Texas, even though the income inequality is so great. The fact that the average Texan is doing better than the average citizen of another state is very encouraging for Texas overall. But here's the problem as well. Going back to the income inequality, the fact is that income inequality is most pronounced between minority groups and between different racial and ethnic groups, I guess I should say. So here's the median household income in 2010 in Texas by race and ethnicity of the householder. So what you're going to see here is that blacks and Hispanics traditionally lag behind their overall earnings compared to non-Hispanic whites and Asians. Asians here in Texas are actually faring far better off than other races and minorities. So Asians are doing a little bit better. Whites are doing very well at $61,000. That's their median. That's the median household income of a person that belongs to the non-Hispanic white race or ethnicity. But blacks and Hispanics once again lag behind. When you consider all races, the overall median household income of the average Texan is $49,000. That's around $50,000. That's way better than people from other states are doing. But the fact is that you need to look at the fact that there is disparity between races and ethnicities here in Texas, and that is kind of a social problem that may need to be tackled here in the future. So I just want to present that graph to you real quick. It's something to think about in terms of racial inequality as well as income inequality and economics overall. Here's your Texas family income by the decade. And what you see here is that another thing contributing to the income inequality here in Texas is the fact that while the rich get richer, the poor don't really change all that much. The bottom 20%, their family income has pretty much stayed the same. And I know this number only goes to the 2000s, but the fact is that it hasn't really changed that much even in the 2010s, if you will. The top 5% have their wealth has increased, while the bottom 20%, their income has mainly stayed the same. And that's important to consider when you consider things such as inflation, the fact that things have gotten more expensive, the fact that the workers are not receiving more money could be a problem for the Texas economy. When you have so much wealth concentrated at the top, it's very hard for consumers at the bottom to spend money or to spend it on goods and things like that. So I just wanted to raise that issue as well. These are things that may concern the Texas economy in the upcoming future if income inequality is more pronounced in the future, if racial and ethnic minority inequality is increased in the future. That's also something to consider as well. So I believe that was the last slide. I believe that's all on the Texas economy. For additional data, I have a number of links here you can look at. Feel free to click on those. But other than that, I will give you a little present here towards the end. You guys have suffered through me lecturing. You've suffered through my lecture videos. So today, this week, there is no discussion board questions. Also, part of that is because your paper is due. So get on your paper. Use the time that you would normally take to typing and researching out discussion board questions, and use that time for your research paper that is due this Friday. So with that, I want to thank you guys for listening to all my lecture videos. I'll have a review lecture video up next week, and also the test is next week as well. But I want to thank you guys for listening to my lectures and for just being really good students. I really do appreciate that. I know online classes are hard. It's hard to get motivated to it's hard to get motivated to log on each week. It's hard to do the work and things like that. So guys, I just appreciate you guys as students, and thank you for being here. Good luck on your final exam. Good luck on your papers and all that good stuff. And I will catch you later. All right.